Today we will solve quadratic equations by factoring. So we're going to use the zero product property in order to do this. And the zero product property states that if the product of two quantities equals 0, at least one of the quantities equals 0. So let's look at what that really means. So here we have 5x equals 0. So 5 times something equals 0. Well, in order to get 0 as an answer, x would have to be 0. So in order to get 0 as the answer when you're multiplying two numbers together, at least one of the products or one of the quantities has to be 0. So we know 5 times 0 equals 0, and 0 times 0 equals 0. 6 times 0 equals 0. So anything times 0 equals 0. And in order to get 0 as an answer, at least one of the two numbers you're multiplying together has to be 0. So what if we had this problem? X minus 5 times x plus 3 equals 0. So in order for that to be true, then either x minus 5 has to be 0, or x plus 3 has to equal 0. One or both of these have to be true in order for this to equal 0. So we can solve each problem separately. So we have x minus 5 equals 0. Add 5 to both sides. X can equal 5, or we have x plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides. X equals negative 3. So x either has to be 5 or negative 3 or both in order for this to equal 0. Now, if I wanted to check to make sure that I got the right answers, then I'm going to plug in these values. So when x equals 5, I have 5 minus 5 times 5 plus 3. Five minus 5 is 0. 5 plus 3 is 8. 0 times 8 is 0. That's a true statement, so that would work. And then if we wanted to check x equals negative 3, negative 3 minus 5, negative 3 plus 3, negative 8 times 0 equals 0. Again, we get 0 equals 0. So those were the correct answers. Either one of those would make our solution 0. All right, let's look at another example here. So we have x times x minus 2 equals 0. So we have two pieces here. We have x and we have x minus 2. So we can set these into two different equations because we know either x has to be 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. All right, we don't have to do anything to solve this part. That's already done for us. Add 2 to both sides over here, and I get x equals 2. So we're saying x has to either equal 0 or 2 in order for this equation to equal 0. So let's check it out if x equals 0. We have 0 times 0 minus 2, which ends up being 0 times negative 2. And 0 times anything is 0, so that works. Or what about if x equals 2? 2 times 2 minus 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. So after we check our answers, they still work. They give us 2 true statements. So we are good with that. All right, let's look at another example here. What if I told you that x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0? Now we can still use the zero product property with this, but we need this to be in factored form. We're going back to the factoring that we did before spring break. Remember that factoring involves finding two numbers that multiply to get the value of c here. So we're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply together to get this number and add together to get this number. So let's think about that. Looks like -4 and -2. So if I multiply -4, and I'm sorry, +2, then I get -8. And if I add -4 plus 2, I get -2. So these numbers work. So I have x minus 8 and x plus 2. All right, now go back to what I was doing before with the zero product property. And I say x minus 8 equals 0 or x plus 2 equals 0. And then I solve each of them separately. So x equals 8 or x equals -2. So my solutions are 4 and -2, and you can check it just like before to make sure that they work. All right. Again, if you have any troubles with factoring, you can definitely practice with Khan Academy or iExcel. All right, let's look at another example here. We have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. And I asking you to find the solutions. So I need two numbers that multiply together to get a positive 25, but add together to get a -10. And I found that -5 times -5 gives me a positive 25. -5 plus -5 equals -10. So those are my two numbers, x minus 5, x minus 5. But these are the same, so you really only have to do it once, because watch what happens if I do split it up. Add 5, we solve each of them separately, x equals 5, or x equals 5. So I only have one solution here, and it's just x equals 5, because this is just a repeat. All right. All right, let's look at one more example here. What if I gave you -2x squared equals 20x plus 50? Now here we can't use the zero product property because nothing's equal to 0 at all. So we need to put this in standard form, and I'm going to do that by adding 2x squared to both sides. That cancels out. So now I have 0 equals 2x squared plus 20x plus 50. Now I'm going to factor this all the way out. I see that there's a 2 in common with everything. So I'm going to first factor out that 2 to make it a little bit easier on myself moving forward. All right, so we set it up 2 times 0 equals 2 times. And then two numbers that add or multiply together to get 25 and add together to get 10 would be 5 and 5. Now I can set up each of these pieces. 2 equals 0. Well, it doesn't, but it's just a number, so we can rule out the answer is not going to be 2. X plus 5 equals 0. X plus 5 equals 0. We notice that these are the same thing, the same equation. I'm only going to solve it once. X equals negative 5. So that again is my only solution of this whole mess here. X has to equal negative 5 in order for it to be 0. That is all I have for you today. The assignment will be page 565, number 20 through 28, and then number 45 and 50. Remember, that'll be in your Microsoft Teams. And happy problem solving!